Good morning, Michael. How are you?
Good morning, Jenny. Looks like you're having some issues there.
Oh my goodness. Rumble is hacking me off this morning. So I'm sorry. We're a little late getting going because I'm trying to figure out what the heck is going on with Rumble, because I set it up like normal last night. And this morning I went to look at it and I'm sitting here trying to go, why is this not functioning? Why don't we have a chat box? Why don't we have, okay, now we're live. Okay. Hello, everybody on Rumble. So sorry about that.
It's probably Russian hackers.
Do what?
I said it's probably Russian hackers.
You know, it probably.
Those pesky Russian hackers are always into American business and everything else.
You know, I like that so much better than operator error.
Let's just blame the Russians.
Everybody does it for everything anyway.
Yeah.
That's what happened this morning. It was definitely not operator error, so let's not worry about that.
That's right.
All right. Well, good morning, Michael. How are you today?
Yeah, good. Good morning. Glad to be on.
Everything going well?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's got to be going well. Look at stock market's going back up. All the presidents and the past presidents are just saying how great everything is. I mean,
have you been watching news media?
Yeah. Yeah, actually.
Okay. All right. So do you have something for us today? Because, you know, I know that we've got a nice audience waiting, I'm sure, for Mary this morning.
Well, sure. Just real quick, I want to I can't impress enough about this book right here. I mean, if you want to have any kind of inkling as to just it doesn't take, it's not a huge book, so it doesn't take a lot of time to read it. But if you want to have any kind of understanding about the history, the true history of what happened to your freedom in this country, read this book. I mean, this is 101, what's happened to this country to a T. I want to talk about another thing. This is, so, you know, I've always talked about the Federal Reserve Bank. You know, it's a private bank. We know that. You know that. I know that. We need to make sure everyone really understands how evil these people are. These people are not our friends in any capacity. Debt is a weapon. Debt is control. That's how we have all these issues. And I'm going to show another graph here in just a second. But I want to show you this. This is from the Federal Reserve's own website. This is about the Fed. So this is their division of earnings. So this is their income that they make. So this talks about all about their income and all their stuff. So let's go down here to the last little section here. Okay, section C. What does that say there? Exemption from taxation. The Federal Reserve Bank, including the capital stocks and surplus therein and income derived therefrom, shall be exempt from federal, state, and local taxation, except taxes upon real estate. So basically, they're still paying property tax on their buildings, but everything else that they have and do is tax-free on all levels. What do you think about that?
I'm wondering if we could maybe copy that and then put it in our IRS paperwork. What do you think? Do you think that would work for us, Michael?
Yeah. And you can go back through all the revisions of this, and they've had multiple, but the last one, this one here is, was August 10th, 1993, is when they completely designated that to this level here. But think about that. These guys are making $1 trillion a year on that's the interest we're paying, not to mention just the debt and the derivatives. And I mean, I could go on forever about that. But they're making $1 trillion a year in profit, zero taxes back to the United States government or whatever we think this whole taxing situation is. Zero.
And they're a private bank.
Yeah. Private bank, 0, 0, 0. I mean, you want to talk about, that is just the biggest slap in the face. I mean, it just gets me just about to go crazy just thinking about what they do to us. Trump and Kamala are all talking about tax on tips. I mean, think about the control to tax someone at the tip level that's barely getting by in the first place. And these guys are paying zero taxes.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. Yeah. Unbelievable. Yeah. Anyway, this is a graph here that this is a combination of two things. So on the last show, I talked about the 10-year bond, and we're not really going to see the stock markets crash. I'm not a doomsdayer. What I'm saying is these markets are getting ready to go sky high. They're going to be just going through the roof here in a matter of time because they're getting ready to just massively inject that much more money into the markets. So what this is a combination of two things. This is a combination of the dollar, just the strength of the dollar, and the 10-year, multiplied by the golden number, just to create a graph. So the lower this number goes, the less we use this as a risk indicator in our investments. So as we're looking at risk in the markets, then this is basically just something we look at. So as this number goes down, there's less risk, which means liquidity is not really an issue. So we know, like, when things really start to unravel, this thing, so this marker here, this is at 300. This is kind of the line where we start really having some risk. And so when this just goes like massively sky high here, then that's when we're going to have the meltdown in the market. And really the meltdown, like I've said before, is going to come not in the stock market. That's what everybody looks at. Everybody looks at the stock market. That's a byproduct. The debt market is where the issue is because there's no liquidity. So Jenny, do you know what liquidity even is? Like, if you have to borrow money, what does that mean? If you have to borrow money to buy something, that means you don't have the cash.
Right, correct. That's
you
not
don't have
liquid.
the liquid. You don't have
Right.
the liquid cash to purchase something.
Correct.
Think about it. We're $36 trillion illiquid. You know, we're borrowing money from the future. We're borrowing money from the future to bring it into the now in order to spend that money. So this illiquidity is what's going to cause this massive correction across all these markets in one way or another. And that's what happened in 2008. You know, when we had the financial crisis, they literally ran out of money. The banking system ran out of money. So the Fed, Bernanke, who was the Fed chairman at that time, he had to jump in and put in like $8 trillion worth of money, you know, just whatever, however much it was. I can't remember off the top of my head. But anyway, they had to just pump all that fake money into the system to prop it up, to keep it going. But we're at these levels now. This debt is getting so high that the liquidity is zero. It's literally, there's nothing there. So just think about that. There's nothing. There's absolutely nothing behind these markets or any of this stuff. So just one day when we run out of liquidity again, your credit cards aren't going to work. Your debit cards aren't going to work. There's nothing in there for the banks to transfer back and forth. So that's what's going to happen sometime in the future. But until then, until that day, these markets are going to go like this. They're all just going to go completely insane because it's all fake. That's all my piece. So we can move on.
Well, so you're saying buy now.
Well, what I'm saying, what I would do, because I can't give you financial advice, but what I would do is I would have commodities. I would have gold, silver, palladium, platinum, oil, gas, you know, things like that. I would have, and they're on sale. They're really not that bad, but try to diversify as much as you can into commodities. And you know, I love crypto. You're not a big crypto person. I love crypto. I love now there are good and bad. There are bad players, but there are cryptos. And in my opinion, crypto will replace the banking system in one way or another in the future, because it has to. But
something's going to have to.
Yeah, it's all going to go through the roof. I mean, everyone's going to be so excited looking at their paperwork and looking at the value of your house and all that. But if you don't own it, you know, if it's not in your hands physically, you know, that 401k, all those things, if they're not in your hands physically, those are numbers on a screen in a bank. It's going to go bye-bye.
Okay. So now with that exciting, happy news, let's bring in Mary. Good morning, Mary.
Good morning. I'm actually thinking now, since we're going to talk about education and politics, that Michael should be teaching that state-required high school course for financial literacy.
Yeah.
Every freshman should be steeped in this and understand. I would say most adults I know have no idea that the Federal Reserve is not a government-controlled agency.
Well, I tell you what, if they just put that book into mandatory reading for every senior, that would change the country in 10 years. That book would change the country in 10 years, because you'd have a ton of kids that would understand what has happened to them.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And some of the things we're talking about now with what's going on in politics and our legislature and with our attorney general and with education may have you writing the book Killing of Oklahoma instead of Killing of Uncle Sam. So
what would that be? Killing Will Rogers? Is that what that would be?
That might be. But a lot of the same dynamics are at play in our state, and a lot of people are not aware of that.
Throw that back up again, Michael, for Julia. The book that we read that we have to, that everybody has to read.
Mm-hmm.
Oops.
You clicked it and I clicked it.
I know, it's funny.
It's The Killing of Uncle Sam by Pastor Rodney Howard Brown, and who was the co-author there? Do you remember? It was
I forgot. He's the one that wrote Operation Gladio.
Yeah, Paul Williams. It was Paul Williams.
Yeah, Paul Williams.
Operation Gladio. I mean, that's literally in effect right now. Also on top of it.
It is. But I mean, we saw that with Trump. We saw Operation Gladio with Trump. So I would quit if I were people. I would quit mucking about with Q and that kind of stuff, and I would pay attention to Operation Gladio. That's what I would do. All right. So tell us what you've got for us today, Mary.
Well, there's a lot of attention across the state and nationally being pointed at Oklahoma public education right now. I mean, our publication is getting inquiries, and we're talking to some national journalists about some of the things we've covered, particularly about student sexual abuse in Oklahoma public schools. So look next week for a piece coming out from Real Clear Politics and Real Clear Investigations that will include both the information and the reporting we've done about Wetumka, Oklahoma, and about our harmful coaching series that started in Little Axe. But the big news and the big buzz going nationally about Oklahoma education has more to do with what's going on between the State Department of Education and our elected officials in the legislature.
Is there something going on there?
Yes. The fur is flying, shall we say. So I wanted to talk through that. It's all happening so quickly, and the local legacy media's headlines make it look all very nefarious. There seems to be only one target in this, and that appears to be Superintendent Brian Walters. And my disclaimer here is I've never spent a day in my natural life as either a registered Republican or Democrat, so I'm not wearing a jersey here, but when I see an overwhelmingly elected official, I want to say he won by 13.5 points. That's an overwhelming victory in a position related to education. There was a mandate there. And this elected official, you might not like the things he says. It's very Trumpish in the relationship that he has with both the media and the legislature. But as a journalist, he is observably making efforts to do what he said he would do in his campaign.
No, you have to give him that. I mean, there's no question, because I have my issues with them. But I mean, you have to give him that.
For sure. And that was in his campaign. If you go look at his platform, it was a platform of increased accountability and performance from an overwhelmingly failing state public education system. So that was the people's platform. That's what every parent wants. And I believe that's why he was overwhelmingly elected. Now we're looking at ongoing attacks from every side of the aisle. Which indicates, we have a uniparty here in Oklahoma in our legislature, and it's been that way for some time.
Okay, stop. I want you to give a definition of uniparty, because I've heard people scoff at that. What does that even mean? What's your definition of uniparty?
My definition of uniparty is when you're observing those in political control, elected officials, who are working actively against the platforms that they ran on to get those votes. They're reaching across aisles behind the scenes to do so. Then we have both Republicans and Democrats acting in a united way to subvert the people's agenda.
Dang. That was so good. I just sprang that on you, and that was absolutely phenomenal. Absolutely. It's that, it's what I call the James Langford effect. I want to reach across the aisle to you. Well, as soon as you reach across that aisle, I don't care what you say, you're losing your fealty to the platform. I mean, there are ways that we can work together, but that reaching across the aisle, there's a picture of somebody literally extending their hand, across to the other side. Well, there you've lost your fealty to the Republican platform, and now you're moving toward the Democrat platform. So it's just ridiculous.
Mm-hmm. And that's where I believe voters are really waking up, and they're coming to ask, if you're not working for me, particularly in Oklahoma, which is an overwhelmingly Republican-led legislature, if you're not working for the registered Republicans, who are you working for? And that's what we begin to ask. And when I see someone who's targeted, whether that's someone I voted for or not, or support their platform, when I see someone who's singularly targeted, it makes me want to really dig in about who's behind it. Will you go to the next slide?
Of course.
There's definitely a battle going on here. And a man named Mark McBride, we'll talk a little bit about him, because in my research here, every move has involved him. He's a lame duck House representative. He's termed out. So he would be a likely selection to make these attacks. There's no downside there. Walters was in a battle last year. Most of these battles, public education is for sure Oklahoma's primary political battleground right now. It's where most of our state budget lies. So it's always in the crosshairs. But this is something that I have personally never seen before with any other state superintendent. Now, the legislature and the AG are very focused on education rules. We went through that whole battle last year, and funding. And just to sort of repeat for those who don't understand what happened with the rules, again, the headlines were pretty misleading. The OSDE has just two tools for holding public education accountable, which is the basis of Ryan Walters' platform. Those tools are the State Board of Education, which is led by Walters, can affect teacher and administrator certifications. That's one of their tools. Yes. If a teacher or administrator is unqualified or is involved in misconduct, they can act to suspend those teaching certificates. There's a due process by which people can fight the battle to not have their certification revoked. But in the end, they can vote to revoke those certifications.
Okay, so let me quick question just to give some composition here. How many times has that been done in our previous administration with Joy Hoffmeister?
Well, I would have to go back and look at all the state board minutes and do that, but I can confidently say rarely. And I can give you a little information that we're going to cover later, but I'll give you that now.
Okay.
When Walters took office, there was not an investigator for the reports of teacher misconduct and other issues that parents were not able to find satisfaction at the district level. Okay, there was really no one for that. And throughout her 8 years in office, that position, even one of them, it was sporadically filled. Now, our harmful coaching series really speaks to that. A victim named Ashley Rowland tried for a couple of years to get someone to look into the accusations at the high school that she attended. And there were multiple accusations. Eventually, they just told her, investigate it yourself. This was under Joy Hoffmeister's administration, and get back to us, because there was no one to do the work. So now there's more than one investigator there. I can say by looking at their bios, they're qualified people. But when Walters took office, and I have a very good source on this, there were over 1,000 backlog cases of concerning reports from parents, students, teachers, others. That
over 1,000.
Over 1,000. Now, not all of those had to do with sexual abuse.
No, but still.
But there were hundreds and hundreds that did have to do with that. So that gives you a little indication about the motivation to take teacher certificates in the previous administration. And I would say those before it mostly. Now the issue with sexual abuse in schools is at epidemic levels now. So it's not really fair to compare now to 50 years ago. But overwhelmingly, this State Board of Education under this new administration has been the most aggressive in this area about removing potentially dangerous people at the accusation with the suspension of their teacher certificates, and then moving through the process without delay of moving toward revocation, investigation and revocation, if necessary, to keep kids safe. Now, the certifications are the one tool that the State Department of Education, the state board has. The other one is district accreditation. So they can downgrade a district's accreditation, and that's where you potentially, for a range of concerns, that's where you potentially get into reducing funding to a district. So that is a political hot topic. Now, the rules that were put through last year, that through the State Board of Education, there was a host, dozens of new rules that were doing just outlandish things like tying a district's accreditation to student performance and student safety. So when I say outlandish, I'm being completely sarcastic.
But hold on. Why in the world would we want to give schools? Why would we want to reward them for doing a good job? Don't we just want to blanket give them money, and then if they do a good job, fine. If they don't, fine.
Well, that would be the argument of the education organizations.
It is. It's just crazy to me. How can that be your argument?
Well, and they were the ones that were in opposition to these rules that the State Board of Education passed. So these are rules that the State Board of Education passes that go along with state statutes that give them some ability to hold schools accountable and to support schools. Now, of course, the education organizations, teachers unions, school administrators associations were in huge opposition. They're highly political organizations, and they fund legislator campaigns. They fund attorney general campaigns. They normally fund state superintendent campaigns, but not this state superintendent. So they fought the rules, and Attorney General Drummond stepped in and said, the state board can't make their own rules. So I just want people to understand how very new that interpretation is. We haven't ever seen that before. So those rules then had to go through the process of working their way through the legislature, and the power was given back to the legislature just over this administration. This is a new thing, to control those rules. Well, that's behind us now. And a lot of new rules are in place, and they do involve keeping kids safe, and they do involve student performance. But now we have a whole new set of accusations, and they mainly deal with funding. So I would just want to stop for a minute and explore those so people truly understand what's happening here. Would you move to the next slide, please?
Well, and real quick, Mary, I just want to, we showed Mark McBride there. We did a show back with Carmen where we went into Mark McBride. Jenny, remember that? Mm-hmm. And this guy right here literally had 30 or 40 people from his own district is all that donated to this guy. I mean, this guy is bought and sold 100% by teachers unions and everybody else. And all his money, literally all his money comes from outside the district. So keep that in mind when we talk about these uniparty people, because guys like this right here that are the major problem, they're not even supported in their own district. Sorry.
No, that's a good point.
That is a very good point. If they're not working for the people, who are they working for? So the most recent accusations say that Walters and the State Board of Education and the OSDE are withholding funds for school security, and we'll talk about that. They're withholding funds for teacher paternity benefits. They're not fulfilling open records requests, and they're blocking legislators from board executive sessions. You've probably seen these things in the headline, and they're just pig-piled. So yeah, I'm going to leave it on this slide for a little bit. Okay. So let me tell you a little bit about the school security funding. It's a little complicated. This is a $50 million fund created after the Uvalde, Texas school shooting, and it was created by the state legislature. It was legislated as a payout over 3 years to schools, $96,000 a year for 3 years to each district. And it was to increase school security in a number of ways. The problem with the legislation is that it is not legislated to roll over. The legislature failed to make it a rollover fund. Now, in education, funds are super specific. They're coming from different places. There's state funds, there's federal funds, there's grant funds, and they all have different restrictions. So these could not be rolled over as the law was written. To taxpayers, I would have to say, rollover funds could be seen that proof that the state's grossly underperforming schools are overfunded in some areas. So if you have these funds for 3 years and you were supposed to do something very specific and meaningful to keep kids safe, and now you're fighting because you can't roll over the excess, do you really need that money? So there's a valid conversation to be had here.
One second. When I worked for the state, because I was a state epidemiologist, where I worked for the state as an epidemiologist for several years, And I learned that was early on in my career. And I learned very early on that there is actually a tactic of let's use all of our money, whether we need it or not, so that we can get the same amount appropriated for next year. It's a freaking game that they play with our tax dollars, your money that comes out of your pocket, and it's ridiculous. If you don't use it, it needs to go right back to the taxpayer.
Well, that's the part of the conversation that you never hear, is if it wasn't rolled over, where would it go? Those are tax dollars. Could that be used elsewhere? So the legislature,
or given back. Why can't I have it back?
Right. There's a number of questions there. So as the legislature and the districts have been accusing Walters and the State Board of Education of withholding those funds that they believe should have rolled over, you have to look at what's actually happened behind the scenes. Walters previously requested a legislative fix for this to allow the OSDE to roll over those funds. Most people don't know that. So the Appropriations and Budgets Education Subcommittee proposed that amendment and passed it through committee, but House Speaker McCall, who's a Republican, never brought it to the floor for a vote. So when you're seeing these headlines that he's withholding money and it's the State Department of Ed, the same people throwing the rocks had the opportunity to fix this. That may also be a sub-definition of the uniparty. So there is what some of the grassroots organizations are doing, picking up where the legacy media has left off the most important details in these conversations. And one of them put out a video. So that would be the first video. It's the video about the security funding. Can we play that? And then we'll talk.
Hold on one second. Let me make sure I'm.
Also, visit. Do you think? I mean, this left off, is that, in your opinion, as a journalist, is that on purpose or is that just ineptitude?
I would say both. Depending on the situation, I've seen that there are a lot of younger journalists, which we have a lot of young television journalists in this town who have not been trained to do the research. And then I think a lot of it is extremely political. When you look at the attacks are coming on this one person, and there's absolutely no support in the media for this person as well, this official, I have to say, question the intentionality of leaving these things out. Okay, so this particular video is of the Education Subcommittee passing through that legislative fix.
Oh. 3404 is a continued work on the SRO bill that we successfully moved forward last year to put SRO in every school in the state, or had the ability to. There are some funds. That's a $50 million fund per year over 3 years. The way the bill reads, 2903, does not let those funds roll over.
February 12, 2023, Mark McBride and 12 other committee members voted to pass HB 3404 in the Appropriations and Budget Education Subcommittee. 6 of the 13 members who voted in this hearing are on the board of the Loft Committee. House Speaker Charles McCall never called the bill for a vote.
So you got to love the grassroots. They're very good investigators. And they've been putting together some things and bringing some things to the forefront that people really need to know. The other point on the security funding that I would have to say is that Ryan Walters and the State Board of Ed did request an opinion from the Attorney General on this, on whether these funds could be rolled over, which seems appropriate. And of course, the Attorney General came out in the media chastising, along with the legislature, and asking for an investigation into Ryan Walters and the State Department of Education over this. It's hard to see how that could possibly go anywhere given the facts in the situation, and this appears to be purely political. Thoughts? Nope, everyone nods in unison.
Well,
Okay.
I mean, honestly, isn't it just the same stuff, different day?
It really is.
I mean, people literally, that's how politics works, is you gin up the public who are generally not educated about any of these things, nor do they want to, because it might get in the way with them going to a Thunder game or watching, binge watching something on Netflix. So they know that people aren't paying attention. So all they have to do is go to the Legacy Oklahoma media and say blah and spit out a bunch of accusations that, take the onus off of them. And people are like, gin up. I mean, it's so stupid, but it works.
Really is.
It works, and that's why they do it.
And it draws the limited capacity of an education administration away from the people's agenda. So now they will spend the next year fighting all of this, and things will suffer for children. So the next funding is about teacher maternity benefits, and it's really a similar situation. Those funds passed last year to support teacher maternity benefits. And the bill was sponsored by multiple Loft members. And let me just say that Loft this is a pretty newly created state agency that the legislature created, the Legislative Office of Fiscal Transparency. So in 2019, they passed something to create a new entity because these 14 members appointed by the Senate Pro Temp and the House Speaker are going to make sure our money's spent wisely. So multiple Loft members sponsored this bill for maternity benefits. The problem was that they didn't appropriate these funds properly. They were misappropriated into the formula, the education formula. And so people can understand. At the State Department of Education, all of the funds go through this system called the GMS. It's the Grants Management System. And if things are not coded and appropriated properly, that agency cannot pay 1 red cent to the district for that. And a lot of these funds are reimbursable, meaning the districts have to expend the money and then show proof that back into the grants management system that they expended them properly before they'll be reimbursed. So the wailing and gnashing of teeth gets pretty loud because these districts have paid out this money for these benefits and they're not being reimbursed because the legislature misappropriated it in their bill. Again, the OSDE requested a legislative fix. This time, I believe it was Bill 1121, Senate bill, and it passed committee. And it passed the Senate saying, we've got to fix this. We've got to appropriate that to the appropriate line in the budget. And again, Speaker McCall failed to call for a House vote on the issue. This was very, very recent. Now they're calling for an investigation into the OSDE over this. So this is the pattern that we're seeing. It feels like a political setup. Now the inhaler funds, that's $250,000 that the legislature designated for albuterol rescue inhalers to be put into our schools. There are a lot of questions about this. In the past, kids would have to, if they had a prescription medication, they would have to have the prescription. It would have to be checked in with the school. The parent was in charge of deciding what pharmaceuticals were given to their children. Now we've sort of done this blanket, we're going to provide them all with albuterol. Albuterol is a stimulant. It raises the heart rate. It does all kinds of things. So Walters has pushed back a bit on this. He said it violates, number one, Central Purchasing Act, which is we can't just hire somebody and buy a bunch of stuff with tax dollars and send it to all of the district. Sole sourcing, we can't be going with one company without bidding with others. And there are a lot of medical and parental concerns. So this is another one they're attacking him on. I don't know how parents feel about this.
Do you want me to play the video of
Pew?
Yes,
absolutely. There's another video by the same source, a grassroots source, and this one is about the maternity benefits.
Now, let me just say it. They did a computer voiceover on this, and it chose to pronounce pew as poo. I'm so sorry. I'm so juvenile, but I was just warning you before I play this that I might giggle just a little bit. But here we go.
And we still have school districts reaching out to me. I was the bill author saying they haven't received their reimbursement for maternity leave expenditures.
On February 28th, Senator Pugh chaired the Budget and Appropriations Committee, where he explained in detail that the funds from last year were never allocated for the maternity fund.
Now, if you remember last year, we gave $12 million, but the way that legislation was written, I believe, by the House of Representatives, it actually took that money through the formula. And so that money was then allocated to the formula without being separated and put into this revolving fund.
On May 8th, 2024, the great senator again explained in an appropriations meeting that they needed to allocate money for last year's request.
We are now making the recommendation, Mr. Chairman, of a $2.3 million supplemental for FY24, which would allow schools who have already submitted reports back to the State Department of Education and are waiting for that money to be reimbursed to those individual school districts. And then we're making a recommendation for an ongoing funding obligation of $2.5 million.
Why did Senator Pugh lie when he knew the truth dawned about the FY24 allocations?
Well, there you go.
There you go. These aren't just opinions, these are facts. That is what happened. The legislature misappropriated. So we have, in both of these cases, with the security and maternity funds, the legislature is responsible for those holdups. We either have a failure to admit incompetence or we have a political game going. So people are going to have to decide about that. And again, we talked about the inhalers. Another thing is open records requests. I don't have numbers and specifics about this. I can tell you that this publication has not had a problem. I looked and we've had 2 open records requests since this administration came in, and we received them both pretty promptly. So I can't speak to why others are coming through, but there's a deluge of these, and many of them are politically based. So we'll see how that works out. In the past, before his administration, I can tell you as a journalist that open records requests went to the OSDE to die a slow death. It was very hard to get any information out of that. Traditionally, it's very hard to get information out of that agency. So the other thing that they're talking about and that they're attacking the State Department of Ed right now about is the State Board of Education meetings. There's a group of legislators who have shown up and have demanded that they be allowed into the executive sessions of that body.
Mary Boren, who is a Democrat, has been the most vocal about that.
Yes. And the AG is now saying they must be allowed into executive session. In his opinion, I will say this is something we've never seen before. This did not happen under Joy Hoffmeister. Nobody was questioning that. But also, no one camped out before the state board meetings under the previous administration or others before. No one disrupted those meetings. No one was demanding that those meetings be moved so they can have more activists in the room to be able to disrupt those meetings. So there's a lot of firsts going on here, and this is one of them. I can tell you this. When you look at when they go into executive session and what they are discussing, they are overwhelmingly discussing what would be considered personnel issues. Yeah. They're discussing teacher misconduct and deciding whether they're going to suspend teaching certificates, and they're reviewing the evidence related to that. So I find it really interesting that these legislators are demanding to be in on those conversations because they've been pretty silent about this issue.
Well, let me just interject here. we're not finding that kind of thing in small towns, for example, because we're having problems and being inundated with people who are talking to us about this particular issue. We're having a lot of issues where school boards, for example, and small towns are doing business in executive session, so they don't have to be privy to the public, and they don't have to get commentary from the public about that. And that I completely disagree with. You can't just use executive session for your own needs and to find a way to escape public purview. You can't do that. So I that's kind of a two-edged sword for me, because there really legitimately are people who are abusing that.
There are at the local
in Edmond.
Say again?
I said we've seen it multiple times firsthand in Edmond alone.
Yeah, especially if they're school board.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, we've seen it as well. If someone is accused of a teacher or coach, someone administrator is accused of sexual abuse, that all happens behind scenes. And a lot of times they're not being upfront in local districts, even in their meeting minutes.
Yeah.
And parents are blissfully unaware of the risk to their children. So I absolutely agree with you there. In looking at the state board minutes, I would encourage everyone to do that and to see when they are going into executive session, and to review the minutes to ensure that you know what happened in executive session. So far, I haven't seen any red flags. This is not where they're deciding that a Bible's going to be in every classroom and the things that people have their hands up about. Yeah. You don't see that. So I'm not sure what it is that the legislators are looking for, but we'll stay on this and see where this goes. Okay. So if you will go to the next slide, we're going to have a little conversation here. And Michael already touched on the fact that the person who seems to be consistently behind these attacks is Representative Mark McBride. He's a Republican from Moore. He is termed out. He is a lame duck House representative. He was first elected in 2012, so he's had 6 elections. And I can tell you very little opposition in those elections. We'll talk about that. He is a very powerful person in state government. He is on the Budget and Appropriations Committee, so he is there where the money is. He is also the chair of the Education Subcommittee. So that's why you're seeing a lot of him in this. He's also on the Energy and Joint Appropriations Committees, but that's not really involved here too much. So I want to talk a little bit about Mark McBride. First of all, as a journalist, I was a bit shocked to know that in 6 elections, he was never really personally vetted. I could really find nothing. And one of the reasons for that is I believe that his first name is not Mark, it's James. And if you look at a lot of the public records, and everything that I'm going to discuss here today are public records about an elected public official. If you look at those, some of them are under Mark McBride, some of them are under James McBride, some are J. Mark, some are James M. And even our own state court systems do not connect those as the same person.
Wow. So
there's a lot to be known. And I think voters have a right to know who these very powerful people in our government are. So let me talk a little bit about, he has a bio, of course, on the state legislator's website. That tells the basics about him, but he went to Northwestern Oklahoma State University up near Enid, got married very early, graduated high school in 1979 from Moore High School. So he is originally a Moore guy, got married the very next year, had a family. There was a DUI in 1984 during that time. When he was in his early to mid 20s, first pled guilty, not guilty, then pled guilty. A relative bailed him out. He was sentenced to 6 days. But honestly, if I don't sound shocked, it's because it's almost a prerequisite for some of our legislators. Yes. So that marriage ended, split in 2001. He was divorced in 2002. And then in 2003, he married a woman named Alana. and she was a program coordinator for Oklahoma Career Tech in medical assisting. Okay. He was elected to the state house in 2012, but the couple divorced not long after that. So in 2013 and 2014, they were divorcing. And this isn't personal. This is about a public official, but I think people need to know this. On the next slide, there's a document. This is the counterclaim. He petitioned her for divorce from his second wife, and this is from the counterclaim. So I'm going to read you just this portion of it. There's a lot more to it. It talks about the petitioner, who is James Mark McBride, in a fit of anger, damaged some of the respondents' separately owned property, which was an antique table that belonged to her father, and she's asking for that to be repaired. Number 7 says the petitioner in the past has been physically abusive and more recently has been extremely verbally abusive toward the respondent. And then this is the part that I feel like people should know. The respondent is completely disabled and has had 2 strokes during her marriage to the petitioner. Petitioner advised the respondent that he was not willing to be married to a disabled person. In January of 2013, he stated, "I'm done, I quit, I want out." Now, keep in mind, this is a divorce document. People say the extreme back and forth. The next paragraph here says that the petitioner is an able-bodied man who has 2 businesses, and that is true, 2 construction, McBride Construction and then a roofing business, both of which were acquired during the parties' marriage. Just prior to filing the petition, the parties resided in the marital home in Cleveland County. The petitioner removed the respondent from the marital home and forced her into an independent senior living center at age 49 years, where she does not desire to be and which was not picked out by the respondent, and then filed this instant action. Then it goes on to say that she has no access to funds, and she asked the court for support to be able to defend herself in this action. How does a politician run 6 times for a state legislature and become one of the most powerful people in the state house? And this is nowhere in the media.
Well, I mean, I think we all know, but I'll be happy to say it out loud. Because private organizations and private individuals find people that they know they can buy, and they donate and donate and donate. And that's because they know that when they donate, there will be some kind of leeway given to them during the legislative session. And I heard something the other day that, I mean, I've heard it before, but it was interesting to hear this person say it out loud, that they had been standing in front of a legislator asking for them to pass this bill that they were interested in. And the legislator looked at them and said, "You're kidding me. I can't do that. That's not what the hospital association wants. The hospital association wants this other bill. I'm going to have to go with the hospital association."
Interesting information.
So what we have is not a government of the people, for the people, by the people. What we have is a government of special interests and big money, for special interests and big money, by legislators who are willing to suck up and be a part of that system. So that's why so many of us who are in the grassroots have been pushing so hard for candidates who will say they're not interested in taking special interest money. They're not interested in taking PAC money, because we're not being represented in our own legislature. And what happens is and Mark McBride became a very powerful person because of who donated to him. And the TV stations that we have and the legacy media that we have are not willing to go up against the people that donate to him, because they also buy television time or ads or something like this. So it's all about money and power. It's not anything at all anymore about the people who pay for the system. We're just extorted funds from so that they can run their businesses, which are the business of giving our tax dollars to other people so that they can grow their businesses, if those are the ones that are seen as being good by the governor or the legislature or whatever. So it's just simply ridiculous.
Well, and just as another little anecdote to Mark, and I'll say power. I don't know if it's necessarily power, but Jenny, in the past, you wrote a bill or had a bill for moving school board elections. Mm-hmm. And in the last session, Emily and I started the Oklahoma Election Project, and we wrote a bill with Sherry Conley to move the school board elections. We talked to every single one of those House reps, made up all the stuff, went there, spent a lot of time. Mark was he literally killed that deal. Without a shadow of a doubt, he was one of the biggest guys behind the scenes stopping that. And what is so wrong with we know that these schools are literally run by Marxists who are put into these positions because no one even knows when a school board election is in the first place. So, it's such common sense, but there you go. You got a guy like Mark killing the school board, putting school board elections in the general election time frame.
Clearly, that bill would be within the people's agenda. Not only would it be more convenient, it would encourage their participation in our democracy. The money, Jenny, I feel like is spot on. I will tell you, when I happen to see these public documents, and again, this is about a divorce, and I know things need to be tempered. I dug in a little bit more, and a source that worked with his second wife, who is described by this source as brilliant. She was very good at what she did, and then had to be let go from her career tech job because she was completely disabled and could not function in that capacity anymore. It's a very sad story. Yeah, just before the filing of the divorce, this source says that McBride pressed an action against Oklahoma Career Tech and gained an undisclosed sum of money related to her release from that organization's employment. I do not know what that undisclosed sum of money is, but that's taxpayer funds. So, and I haven't gained any, there's no public document that can tell me how this particular divorce ended, fiscally speaking. Another thing that's pretty concerning is those 6 campaigns that he ran, largely unopposed. In primaries, sometimes he would have someone against him in the primary, but even in 2020 and 2016, he had neither a primary opponent or a general election opponent. And in 2016, his campaign raised about $67,000. And in 2020, $80,000. What are you spending that money on when the election is canceled due to lack of opponent in either the primary or the general election?
Well, don't forget, part of our campaign ethics situation here allows them to donate money to other campaigns.
Yes.
And play the I'll scratch your back, you scratch my back game.
That is a very good point that you bring up about campaign finance, which desperately needs reform. So to wrap this part up, that the same year that this divorce was concluded, McBride married his current wife. Also about him that I think is pertinent. So there was in 2020, the Oklahoma Council on Public Affairs began their legislator scorecard, and they began to score. And again, OCP, I think, is a very conservative think tank here in Oklahoma that's involved in lobbying.
It's a think tank.
Mm-hmm. So they did that. They put together scorecards where they were rating every legislator based on how they voted and what they advocated for. They rated Mark McBride in that first year as a 35 out of 100. And there's an interesting story where Jonathan Small of OCPA was walking by a room at the Capitol, a meeting room, and claims that Mark McBride flipped him off and then called him in and berated him with some very obscene language. There's an entire article from back then that Jonathan Small didn't hold back and told about that, which tells a little bit of the character about how these things are happening behind the scenes, and any pushback against whatever their agenda is backstage is going to be met with anger. So that was another piece of this. And then the last piece of it is there is, in his bio consistently, there's been information about a nonprofit, that he is the founder and president of Thousand Hills Mission. And when you do a little, that's up there currently. It talks about his activities in church and his mission work. Well, that particular entity, although it's still registered as active with the Secretary of State, has not been active since 2013 as far as its filings with the IRS. The most money that they ever gained in a year was $72,000, almost 73 in 2011 as he was running for office for the first time. And the expenditures aren't incredibly detailed. This was supposed to be an effort to bring agricultural and veterinary supplies on mission trips to different countries in Central America. But it stopped. It stopped, and there's very little detail. It looks a lot like the two people, he and his second wife, who he later divorced, formed this. Mark McBride was the president, and a man named J.P. Fox, who is associated with Fox Building Supply in the construction world, was the vice president of this organization. Strangely, in another filing, we see that in McBride's indebtedness issues, which were pretty substantial, some wages were garnished, and they notified Fox Building Supply and J.P. Fox as one of his creditors. So it's a very interesting relationship in this nonprofit that stopped doing any work in collecting funds, but still technically exists. And he's still got it on all his bios and in his campaigns.
How odd.
It is odd. So there's just a lot here that doesn't engender a whole lot of trust. And now this person is leading the attack against, and I don't consider it an individual, I consider it the people's agenda for education. Some common sense things that people want done in education. So, moving on. If you'll go to the next slide, I just wanted to take a minute to say, why the political pig pile here? Why are so many people jumping on this? Overwhelmingly, the Uniparty, led by Republicans, in this situation, it's very reminiscent of what happened with the Tea Party candidates in 2010.
Yeah.
And Janet Barisi, who was the first ever Republican state superintendent of education. So Walters, I believe, if you're going to look at this and say why, Walters was the very first one to tie funding to student performance and safety. That's a big point.
Yes.
And the State Board of Ed is heavily cracking down on student sexual abuse in Oklahoma schools. That's another big thing. Yeah. Almost every district is involved here in some way in this issue, whether they handled it correctly or incorrectly. This affects everyone. And then we just have to talk about general corruption and conflicts of interest, both within the legislature, which is dominated by Republicans, and in the Republican Attorney General's office. So that the conflicts of interest between the Uniparty are really serving themselves in special interests, as you were saying, Jenny. The education organizations fund their campaigns, even through dark money, which we learned through Hoffmeister's first term. It was two of the education associations that funded the $100,000 that got her indicted for.
Yeah, COSTA and OSSBA.
It was. These public officials are embedded with special interest bagmen who parade as political consultants. And that's been happening since about 2010. In the Attorney General's office alone, his chief of staff openly ran a dark money group of $10 million in the last election cycle. And the only purpose of those funds was to bash Governor Stitt's reelection campaign and Attorney General O'Connor.
Oh, and Josh Burkeen.
Oh, and Josh Burkeen, very much.
And Josh Burkeen.
Yep, that was the Sooner State Leadership Fund. And
correct.
He did not. A man named Trevor Worthen, who's a notorious political consultant, his communications are within the indictment on Joy Hoffmeister. He was a part of that. These people had the same common contributors to their campaigns. And now that particular person is now under a taxpayer salary as the chief of staff within the Attorney General's office. Mm-hmm. So the politics are completely embedded into the system, and the contributors are the same. The tribes are big contributors to a lot of these. Cannabis is a huge contributor, which Attorney General Drummond's bank, Blue Sky Bank, is one of the biggest financiers of the cannabis industry here in Oklahoma, and the education organizations.
And Chamber of Commerce.
And Chamber of Commerce. Yep, there are a lot of things. So people need to be aware as they see these headlines and these attacks are happening to look behind the scenes and really get some information. The other thing that I wanted to talk a little bit about is Jenny Inspired. Jenny and I were having a conversation the other day about education funding, if you'll go to the next slide. And is all education good for Oklahoma? Or is some of it working against Oklahoma values? We hear these fights saying they're holding up the money, they're holding up money from schools, they're robbing children, they're making them unsafe. But what people have to understand is most of this money moves through the State Department of Education, if it's not just the general state money, through grants. That's why they call it the grants management system. And those grants have professional development requirements. That's very common. That these people who are running this money within Oklahoma school districts and these programs that are paid for by specific grant money attend professional development and training. A lot of that happens at out-of-state conferences. So this ends up being a very big perk, particularly for your rural school teachers, to get to go to places like Las Vegas and Orlando and stay for 3 or 4 days. These conferences I've been to have pool parties, meals, events. There's drinking if that's what you want to do. So these are not just sit down and learn how to be a better teacher. They are filled with indoctrination. So I shared with Jenny about, I covered such an event in California and I was off. It was in 2017 and it was an educators conference. And I went to all of the workshops, tried to see what was going on, because if it's happening in California, it's coming for you, Oklahoma. So think, this is 7 years ago. And I went to a number of workshops. 2 that stand out to me the most from 2017. One was teaching teachers from across the country, including dozens of teachers that were there from Oklahoma. All of the terminology related to the world of gender fluidity. And there was a young man teaching the class. He was from a nonprofit. And he introduced himself saying that he previously identified as female, that he now identified as non-binary. It was a room of probably 50 attendees around, a dozen tables. He handed out the terminology and started speaking through this. And at one point, I raised my hand, was the only question in that entire session, and asked about the evidence base behind introducing topics of adult sexuality and gender fluidity in the educational environment to K through 12 kids. He responded very angrily, told me that there was no funding for such research, no one would do it, but if there was funding, that it would say exactly what he'd put in those papers he was giving us. Really concerning. So that was our teachers, and they're steeped in this 7 years ago. I went to another workshop that was led again by nonprofits. So we have to think about nonprofits being infused into our schools. These are not certified people. Sometimes they're not background checked people, and they're being infused into our schools. Already in 2017, they were leading the education of teachers. And in this particular workshop, it was a youth program in central LA that had purchased a house and was having kids from the school come to their house after their organization's house after school for tutoring and those kind of things. They did an exercise where they laid a huge piece of paper out on the ground, and they had youth from their program there. They said it was all youth led, where they drew a circle in the middle of the floor, a small circle. It said, this is how we introduce people into our program. And they asked the kids where the power was in their world, who had the power. And the kids immediately chimed up, like well-indoctrinated youth, and said, well, those people are white. So they put a W in the center of the circle. Then they said, those people are Christian, and they put a C in the center of the circle. And then they said, those people are cisgender and able-bodied. And they went down the list showing who they believed had the power. Then they drew huge concentric circles outside of this, and the children started to identify the things about them that made them powerless. Their sexual identity, their ethnicity, until they had these kids so far out on the fringe of this that it was crushing to think how unempowered they must feel. There was also an instructor there who she was the director of the program, who had her hand on the thigh of one of the student participants while we were all on the floor pretty much the whole time. It was very awkward. It was something that drew my eye immediately and looked like inappropriate touch. So to let you know that the funding is not always good and it is not always working toward Oklahoma values, please consider that. When you hear that the State Department of Ed might be rejecting funding, go and look for yourself. Find out what those requirements are. It may be at the State Department, it might be at the U.S. Department of Ed on their website. It might be at the State Department of Ed. It might be outside money from something else, but know what the requirements are and why that conversation might be happening.
So I told you the same story I'm getting ready to tell you. I've had a longtime friend who is a music teacher in an Oklahoma public school. And I remember, oh golly, it's probably even before what you were talking about in 2017. She went to a conference, music conference. And she sent me back, I still have the picture of it in my head. She sent me back a roster of all of these breakout sessions that she could go to. And they were the craziest freaking things I've ever heard. Stuff like communist chants from 1920, how to create a community of learners in socialism, or I mean, they were just like flat out with it. And I'm like, it's music, people.
Yes.
What does this have to do with anything? It's music. It was the craziest thing. And I remember looking at that and thinking, okay, this was during the time that we were fighting Common Core. And I remember thinking, okay, something is really rotten in the neighborhood to hear that. But then, we've had, for those of you who are watching today, if you want to go back, Michael and I had an interview with Julian Romanello where we talked about the insidiousness of private nonprofit organizations and how they have, for decades and decades, donated funds to groups, to state agencies, to whatever. And when you look at they'll say, here's the money, but you need to do X, Y, and Z. And when you look at the X, Y, and Z, it literally changes the complexion of the entire organization that took the money or the state agency that took the money.
Yes.
And the only way that you can really, this is how I think about this. I went out to way out in the Panhandle one time to do a talk, and I think it was about dark money. And one of the people said, oh, gosh, Jenny, I'm so sorry there aren't more people here, but there's a baseball game tonight and everybody's out at the public school. But I just have to say, I can't imagine this little tiny town. It has changed so much since I have grown up here, and I just can't figure out how. But it seems to be the kids. And all I can think of is that public schools are little infection centers for socialism and communist thought. And they're dropped in these districts all over your state. And they don't just get wired in, these crazy Marxist, communist, socialist nutball things. They get it because those teachers do what you do, went to a conference, get it at these crazy conferences. They bring them back. Dana said teachers and school admins are attending these things and bringing them back here to guarantee it comes here. Yeah. And that's exactly what they do. I mean, there's no question about it. So I know you can argue with me about public education and what it means and what it looks like without it and all that kind of stuff. That's fine. But you need to look at them as little infectious centers of anti-American garbage. Because if you live out in the Panhandle in some little tiny town and you're wondering why it is that your little tiny town suddenly doesn't have the same value system it had when you were growing up, what's the one thing in that whole town that brings in money, people, ideas? What is it? It's your public school.
It is. And the funding noose here is a lot tighter than people think. Becky here is commenting about how she went to a similar conference her first year in Oklahoma education, and it was bizarre. And she makes a really great point about there are local options for doing some of these things so that you don't have to be exposed to this. But let me say this, some of these federal funding streams and federal grant streams, they actually require annual out-of-state attendance at a conference. So it doesn't matter if you're in Montana or Oklahoma, you can't stay there to fulfill the requirement. And then they will give several approved conferences.
Approved.
And who's approving them? Well, the United States Department of Education is approving a lot of those. So the funding is the mechanism by which the progressive platform in education is being pushed even into the most rural of schools. So, and a lot of this money goes to schools that qualify as the lowest performers. Yeah. So that becomes really devastatingly impactful in that kind of a community.
Well, and when you look at professional development, in all honesty, and I'm sure I'm going to get all kinds of pushback for this. Sorry, going to say it anyway. When professional development, I was a teacher. How much professional development do you really need to have? I mean, I honestly can't figure that out. You give tests, you take grades, you develop curriculum, there's just not, I mean, I always thought professional development was just stupid and never went to them if I could get out of it, because I thought I'm going to, spend money doing this. And I'm not really sure, why do I need to go to any of these things? But it's exactly what you said, Katie. And I get it. You're in a little teeny tiny school. Going to San Francisco sounds like the greatest thing since sliced bread. But then once you get there, you're not terribly thoughtful about what you're consuming. And because you're there and it's very exciting, and because now you feel great because somebody's paid for you to go there, you feel like you have the obligation to bring some of this back and inter it in your being because, they paid for you to have this. And that's what these people know. That's what people think. And so even the most well-meaning people, and probably sometimes it's the worst, it's the well-meaning people, right? Because they're like, oh, I want to do a good job. They sent me there. Well, this sounds really funky, but I want to make sure that I do what they sent me to do, and I'll bring that back, and they don't think about these things.
Yes.
Well, that's what, we've hit that multiple times with just looking at how the school system itself from the ground up, our modern school system is, based on that Prussian type of system to where you're producing mindless automatons, obedient little workers. And in our society, I mean, I'll say it. I know you don't want to say it, Jenny, but there's not that much critical thinking. Yes, there's entrepreneurs. Yes, there's people outside, but we're talking about the general consensus of the larger aspect of the population within these schools. You are rewarded for just being the best little automaton. If you follow the system to a T, you do exactly what they say, you get the best jobs, you make the most money, you have the best life if you follow the system how they have it laid out. It's the same thing with all the continuing education. When you go to continuing education, you may have good intentions, but they're rewarding you with these venues. They're rewarding you through the experience. So now, like you said, you're obligated to bring that back. You're just the best little rule follower. You're the best little person. You're not thinking, hey, what kind of impact is this going to have if I put this into place in my classroom or say this or start acting like this? But that's how that whole system is. It's just like Rockefeller said way back in the teens. Competition is a sin. The people that, and we talked about it with Julianne, the globalism aspect, the people that are in control, they do not want competition. They do not want us thinking and educating our kids, because if our kids knew about money, if our kids knew about all this tyranny, if our kids knew of what real freedom and real things were that we're supposed to have as guaranteed to us by our creator, not the government, then they would oppose all this stuff. They would not allow this stuff to happen, but they can't afford to do that. So they've got to double down on this automaton system in order to keep the control where it is.
And it works like a charm. My daughter sent me a TikTok this morning. I wish I could. I'll see if I can't figure out a way to pull it up. But she sent me a TikTok this morning on Instagram, actually, and it was of this young girl talking about how she doesn't have the money for groceries, but she feels so bad, and Governor Stitt so bad because he didn't sign up for this USDA program so that kids could eat, but she's happy to donate her tax dollars to do this. You can tell she had no idea what she was talking about, but it was all about feelings. And I just feel, oh my God, like totally feel for these poor people. You're just like, quit feeling and turn on your brain. The problem is there's nothing in their brains to turn on. We don't put it in there. All we do anymore in schools is teach them how to feel their way through things. And the biggest thing in the Bible is, the heart is wicked and no one knows how wicked the heart is. We should be, using our wisdom and not our heart, but, good night. And then I wanted to say what Julia said earlier. It makes teachers believe that they are the experts. I think that's huge.
Yeah.
And parents, many who have amazing lives and experiences, aren't qualified to know what's best for their kids. I thought that was a really great comment, Jules, because it really is true. Well, I went to this. I've been to this development class, this professional development class, and you haven't. And that's exactly what it is. It is.
It is. And the other thing that you will not see is these professional developments that are brought back with a great deal of indoctrination. they're never tied to performance outcomes for kids. So the
Yeah.
funding brings in this thinking, but the funding is never taken away for underperformance or lack of improvement or any of those things. But I'm going to give you, as we sort of wrap up this discussion about,
I know, because we're running late, but that's okay.
This attack on sort of the people's agenda in education. I did receive a note this morning that with all these firsts I was telling you about, these people camping out for state board meetings and demanding to be in executive sessions, apparently tomorrow at 8 a.m., there is a push for people to meet at the flagpole outside of the State Department of Ed, the Oliver Hodge building, to pray for the State Board of Education in their meeting. So I thought that was an interesting twist. So there's a lot of protesting going on out there. It's usually very like-minded. This should be interesting. So 8 a.m. out at the flagpole in front of the State Department of Ed. Okay.
And did you see this from Dana? The kids are even being taught that the teachers know more than parents because they have college degrees to teach and we don't. I mean, as a homeschool parent, I can't tell you the number of times that I had teachers literally, I mean, like dog me on Twitter or something like that and say stuff like, well, you don't, how many degrees do you have in teaching? And I was like, never mind. We'll go through that another time. We're running late. And I want to talk about the lawsuit before we get off of here too. So
okay, excellent. Should we let me touch on the couple of other things now that we're done with this? If you'll go to the next slide, just to make
hold on a second. Capital Sooner makes a really good point. If Walters had rolled over the funds, they would have impeached him for misappropriating.
Exactly. That's the situation that we were in. Our legislature is creating these problems and then they're blaming it on him. And if he had followed through, that is a great point, that when you're being targeted, you have to cross every T twice.
Good job, Steve. All right.
Okay. So just some new news. If you all want to go to visit.com and look under the harmful coaching tab, we have part 4 of the series out, where we've been following some coaches from Little Axe, previously from Little Axe Public Schools, and sort of a culture of student sexual abuse. The latest edition, we have new whistleblowers and new victims coming forward. And if any of you are on here, I applaud your bravery and I thank you for trusting us to tell your story. And now the superintendent of Shawnee Public Schools, current, has been accused of sexual misconduct within this. This publication turned, a lot of that information was not published and it was given straight to the Oklahoma State Department of Education's investigative team, because this was not based on the original whistleblower documents that were sent to them by Miss Ashley Rowland last year. So we wanted to give them time to look into that. As you know, Shawnee Public Schools has a history of student sexual abuse and cover-up with the Ron Arthur coaching case. That was a 15, 16 years of letting that go on. So we're in our next and final installment of that. We're going to talk about what politics has to do with some of this, because there are some ties from the district level to the state level that people need to be aware of. And then the other piece that you'll be on the next slide, you'll be hearing more about nationally, is the breaking story that we put out that there's another federal civil lawsuit against an Oklahoma public school district for perpetuating child sexual abuse internally. This one, looking at the facts, may be the biggest settlement yet in tiny little Wetumka. You can go to visit.com to read the latest article. There's 2 plaintiffs in the case, 2 males we talked about the last time we were here that are within the statute of limitations, which is shameful in Oklahoma. If you are going to sue an institution civilly for this kind of behavior and cover up, you only have 2 years from the abuse or 2 years from the age of majority, which is 18. So a lot of these people are still experiencing abuse when the time clock runs out for them to seek any justice. The defendants in the case, now the attorney that is representing these 2 victims is Lori Kohler, and she does a lot of work with victims in this area. The defendants are Wetumka Schools and Brett McGee, who's the perpetrator, and his superintendent wife, Donna McGee. is named as a defendant, both personally in her role as superintendent. The Wetumka Public Schools has hired the Center for Education Law. They did that back in November, knowing this was coming. Yes, the same law firm that's involved in Shawnee's mess, the same law firm that's been involved in quite a few of the things that we've covered. So some things to keep an eye on.
And don't forget, let's not forget, Center for Education Law gets what kind of money?
Public money.
It's our money.
They do.
Taxpayer dollars. They get taxpayer dollars to defend that school against taxpayers. Let's not forget that.
And these two different series that we're involved in, shockingly, no one else has touched. And now some national independent media is coming in, and you'll be hearing more nationally about both of these situations.
Wow. Well, Viz, let me ask you just a question, your opinion here. I mean, do you think that a lot of what you've uncovered is at that superintendent and, high level administrative level here within these schools, as far as like the total corruption goes? I mean, if can we solve that issue simply by having getting rid of all these superintendents at every single one of these school districts and just having a regional set of very qualified, very sophisticated, very adept superintendents to, maybe manage, 10 or 12 or 15 districts, all at once? I mean, to me, it just seems like you have highly unqualified, highly unethical people in these positions because, I mean, let's face it. I mean, you're running a school district is literally a mini corporation. And, you need to have someone with real ethics and real business principles in order to run that.
I would love if that was the solution. I feel like anywhere that power is concentrated, we're going to end up with the same problem. So these superintendents and both of these people, this couple in front of us, have the best jobs in town, the most lucrative jobs in town. And that will always be protected over students. And I'm not saying that in every district. I see a lot of districts do this well. The minute someone is accused, they are removed from the classroom. Law enforcement is brought in. They're calling DHS. So I want to be clear. This is an epidemic, but there are some districts that do follow the law. That being said, I don't believe that just lesser layers are going to solve that. And I think when you see our final installment of the Harmful Coaching series, you'll start to understand how political this cover-up is and how it's actually coming from higher than the district.
Yeah.
Jeez. I mean, that's not shocking, but good night.
Yes. Yep. So we will stay on it. The encouraging thing is there have been more of these people removed from schools in the last year than I could have hoped and prayed for. So there are some really good things happening at the state level there.
Well, and you've got Keeley, who says, I've said this many times, but it can't be said enough. Thank you for naming these names and standing up for all these victims. And I want to jump on top of that by saying this. I've been active in politics in Oklahoma in one way or another since 2008, a little before even. And the one thing that I noticed when I first started, there's this President Reagan, you don't attack another Republican kind of thing. That's not how he meant that when he said that. But we have this climate of quiet. Ooh, I like that. I think I'm going to trademark that. Climate of quiet. But it's true. I mean, people don't want to say, they don't want to talk about Mark McBride. Well, I'll just talk about a legislator. I'm not going to say their actual name. And they don't want to use names. They don't want to talk about things. They don't want to get this out. People are scared. And you don't live in a republic. You don't live in a free republic if you're scared to mention names or to talk about things in public. You don't. Now think about that. Really take in my comment. You don't live in a free republic if you're afraid to name names and you're afraid to talk about things in public. And that should be an extreme concern for us, because what you have is you have people who have money, these political consultants, these people who run PACs, some of these legislators who literally will sue you for defamation, or try to sue you for defamation, or try to do something like that just to keep you from talking about these things that are happening, because they work so many layers to keep things under wraps, under quiet. And, quiet as in silver tape over your mouth. That's about right. And if we are going to get anywhere, we've got to quit being fearful. I mean, we just have to, especially if you're a Christian. You shouldn't fear. You should know that God has your back in one way or another. It may not come out like you hope, but he still has your back. And we're just going to have to say things. I mean, this is one of the reasons why I'm suing the state election board. And I'll just jump in that to finish up here, and then we'll come back for one last word from you, Katie. But that's part of the reason why I found somebody to help me sue the state election board. I think so many things happen in which people get onto boards and commissions. People try to get into politics, and they're told over and over again, we don't talk about that, or we're not going to say anything about that, or you can't mention that person's name. And so they end up becoming just mouthpieces for the people who are, have their thumb on them. And we have to stop doing that and stand up and say, I don't care what elected official you are, who you work for, what you represent. I don't care. I'm going to tell it like it is. And I'm not talking about defaming somebody. I'm not talking about making stuff up. I'm talking about doing, like, for example, you went out, Mary, and you looked up on OSCN. It's public record, and these are the things that you found out about Mark McBride. They're public record. If you can't say that in public about public record using that person's name, we don't live in a free republic.
Well, particularly when you're talking about a public official. When you become a public official, you are subject to vetting, and that's the job of journalism.
That's an appointed person or a person that's elected. If you're making any money from taxpayer dollars, you are subject to full transparency. And that's the end of it. If you don't like full transparency, don't be an elected or appointed official. It's a pretty easy problem to solve.
Correct. And then when we start to see these public officials clearly aiming outside of the stated goals of their own party at someone who was overwhelmingly elected by the people to do some very specific things in education, this should be happening from every outlet. They should be questioning why these people are working against the people. And we're not talking about, everyone wants to radicalize this agenda and say, there is a lot of talking about woke, but I think it's a lot more simple when you talk to parents. When you talk to parents, we don't want to talk about adult sexuality in our schools, period. Our schools are failing our kids. Academic outcomes are really down. We want some accountability. We want some say in what's going on and bringing back rights to the parents. That's really this platform. And that's what's being attacked.
Yeah.
This isn't about a person.
No, I agree. So let me finish this. Let me just say, we did have some movement on my lawsuit against the state election board. They did initially, they asked for dismissal. My attorney came back, refiled the petition, which we have a right to do, trying to make it very clear that the things that I said in public were not done as my position as an alternate Oklahoma County Election Board member. They were done as a member of the public, as somebody who is a journalist, who is a researcher, and that's what I did. And after that, the judge did come back and deny the request for dismissal. So far, full steam ahead, people. Just got to have you actually actively praying for a jury trial. I just believe that that's important in this situation because, again, I don't want to defame anybody. I just want to show exactly what happened. And I have plenty of information about what exactly happened. And that's what we need to talk about. Just the facts. We don't need to call people names. We don't need to do anything like that. Let's just talk about the facts. And I believe that the facts are definitely on my side. And I think in having a jury trial will really kind of bring home, I think, for people, the level of administrative, what do I want to call it? Swampiness that we have even here in Oklahoma. And people need to know, taxpayers need to know, voters need to know, people who are voting. If you don't know what's going on, please, I'm begging you, stay home. Please, I'm begging you, because you're literally making it worse for those of us who are actively involved and know what's going on and want to vote because, we know the issues. And I hate to say that in a Democratic republic, but I'm saying it because we have gotten to the point where political consultants and candidates who want personal gain out of their elected posts are literally going to spend tens of thousands, if not hundreds of $1,000s on local races to keep people that want to hear the voice of the public, which is what government is all about, out. So, and they know that it works, that people don't pay any attention. So they just throw out these tens of thousands of mailers. Oh my gosh, I can't believe that Jake Merrick is a rhino. I've said that 100 times because it's true. That's what people do. And then they don't vote for the right person because they're voting from a push card, which would sponsored with funds more than likely by some kind of PAC or special interest group. So don't believe what you read in these things. Do not do it. Find a good site where you can listen to the actual candidate themselves talk, go to the candidate themselves and listen to them talk. Don't pay attention to the garbage that comes in your mail or is on, I've seen lots of ads now on YouTube. So.
Agreed.
All right. So that's my spiel for today. Anything to close this up, Mary?
I would just say, dig past the headlines on this where education and politics meet in Oklahoma today. There's much more to it.
Well, just like there is with everything. So we so appreciate you visit.
Thank you. I
really
appreciate being here.
Honestly, you are, and I know Michael would agree with me on this. You are definitely an arrow pointing in the right direction for Oklahomans and a person of journalistic integrity. And for those of you who are watching, we have a nice audience this morning. God bless you. I appreciate you being on with us. Please tell other people about our channel. Please tell other people about what we're doing. We have Michael, how many videos do we have out there?
A lot, probably just under 100, I bet now.
I know. If you have a question about something that's going on in Oklahoma in education, but also liberty issues. We've started going outside the education envelope a little bit and just talking about land grabs and biosludge and solar farms and all of these ways that our liberty is being actively destroyed by those people who we have voted for and are now in office and supposedly protecting us, which they're not doing. They're not protecting the people. They're protecting special interests. And you can just see it every day. So please tell people about what we're doing. We really appreciate you getting that information out. Also on Friday, please note, we will be live on Friday and we will be with candidate Jim Shaw, who is running for representative in House District 32, which is actually next door to mine. He's running against Representative Kevin Wallace, who is the chairman of the House Appropriations Committee and who is in his last stretch as an elected official in Oklahoma. He has spent, I just published this the other day, he has spent about $68,000 with his political consultant Camp to produce all kinds of mailers and ads and things that have not been accurate about Jim Shaw and have called him a liar. I mean, Kevin Wallace has legitimately I've got screenshots of him coming out and calling him a liar. So we're going to talk to Jim Shaw on Friday about this election. And I mean, he's just a person who got involved and was like, man, I don't like the representation here. I would like to be able to try to provide better representation than what I'm getting out here. And to see the things that he has gone through, it's exactly like you were saying, Visit. If you're going after the right things, you will be attacked like you simply can't even imagine. It's just shocking.
Mm-hmm.
It's shocking. And for those people who are uninformed, when they hear these attacks, they believe the attacker, they don't believe the attackee. And we've got to start changing that, because people have got to understand that in our society today, it has become so top heavy with people that are pressing their agenda through our representatives by funding their campaigns, that they literally are calling good evil. And we need to get out what's going on so that people can see this actively happening and rebuke it. I mean, just rebuke it and say, I'm not believing that. I'm going straight to the source. The way you're coming down on this guy, calling him a liar and all these other things, how can that be right? So please tune in on Friday. We'll be here at 9:00 on all of our regular channels, and we will talk with candidate Jim Shaw. So anything else, Michael?
Well, yeah, I want to just, with Mary still on here, I want to just say and point out, look at the power of a citizen journalist. I mean, look at the light that has been shown by a citizen journalist, not someone part of the established media, not someone, sanctioned by some big corporation under big lights and all this makeup and all this fake everything. Look at the power of a single person who gets engaged to actually spread or research and publish what is really going on. So I would just encourage everybody, you don't have to be a wonder kid and do everything. Just pick a single little thing, one little subject, one little thing, and just go after it and just publish whatever you can, find out whatever you can, even if it's just the smallest little thing in your kid's school or whatever it is. A citizen journalist is the future of liberty in this country.
Amen. Well said.
Thank you, Michael. That was very flattering, beyond deserved.
It's not flattering. It's just true.
Well, and I will say that this publication, I launched this particular publication because no one else, freelance, on staff, otherwise, there came a point where you were not allowed to tell the truth. So like Michael said, just go tell the truth in some important part of your life. You will, you will help others.
You will. And the more we do it, the more other people will do it. Because don't forget that too. Once you stand up, the other people, even if they're standing behind you, at least they're standing.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, go out there and give people something to stand for, to stand behind, because guys, we've lost this country. There might be a way we can get it back, but the only way to do that is become so thoroughly engaged that we know what our elected officials are doing. We go to our city council meetings. We follow what's going on with our representative. We stay in touch with them, our representative and our senator, all of these things, because don't forget, it's not about Trump, y'all.
Yeah.
Not about Trump. It's about what's under your feet. I say that over and over and over again. You don't affect national politics like you can affect what's right here under your feet. So get involved where you are, at your city council meeting, at your school board meeting, whatever that is. find it and get involved. All right. We love you. Thank you for being with us. We will see you on Friday at 9 a.m. I know you're going to love that talk or that particular conversation. I'm sure you'll enjoy that. So tune in. And thank you so much for being here. We really do appreciate you, and spread the word.